The year was 1993 in the late Cretaceous period at the University of Vermont. I was in the hallway and we'd put up a poster that had some Russian language on it just for kind of fun, this being right after the USSR fell. And we see two young students there, Yulia and Elena, who are staring at this Ruski Yazyk, Russian language, and turns out the girls are from Russia and Ukraine, respectively. We're chatting, I'm talking to the two girls. Yulia is from Russia and Elena is from Ukraine. And I said, isn't there a Ukrainian language as well? And Elena says, oh yes, there is. And the Russian girl looks down at her, she's much taller, and says, no, there isn't. They only speak it in the hills. And the Ukrainian girl looks up as if to say, bleh. I wonder whatever happened to those two countries. In fact, we should probably talk about how long the Ukraine-Russia tension has been going on since the fall of the Soviet Union, and maybe talk about who's been president on up to the current situation. Next up.
Guys, it's time for some game theory.
Welcome back to Game Theory Today. I'm Eric Garland. Ukraine and Russia are big in the news right now. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was just at the White House for what I described as a poop-flinging chimp circus. I could use other words, and so could you probably if you saw any of the video. It was pretty hard to figure out what was going on, so I had to put it in the context of three different international relations theories just to try to get us up to speed in the last video here. I've seen a lot of reaction online supporting Ukraine. I've seen support for Ukraine for almost 3 years right now since the war began. It's pretty great. I mean, look, I'm an American. We really like the underdog story, and really nothing could speak better to the underdog story than the relationship between Ukraine and Russia right now. And it's epitomized by President Zelensky, who's physically smaller in stature, and he goes around kind of dressed for combat. And it's very clear he's being beat on by one of the biggest empires in history. It's very much a David and Goliath thing, and all the imagery around it really plays into it. So I see a lot of support online, and that's great. I'm saying, look, Trump's beating up on him. Well, it certainly does look that way. And Ukraine is the real home of freedom in Europe right now. Well, it's a great story, and it's developing as we speak here. They're our greatest ally. Well, that might need a little bit of unpacking there, because they're not technically our ally. We could get into that from an international relations perspective. It gets complicated. They're the leader of the free world, I saw one political science professor say, and I'm like, whoa. Back it up there. Ukraine is a much more complicated country than that. This president is maybe more complicated than that. Charismatic, certainly. And, an amazing voice for democracy. And I support and adore really everything that's going on in an otherwise very complicated situation. And it just occurred to me that there's all these people that have these opinions about who is currently president of Ukraine and how great the country is and how great he is. And it occurs to me that we've never really had Ukraine on the television news, nor the rest of Europe. Most people can't name what form of government they have in Canada, which is our greatest trading partner and almost certainly our greatest ally. In a real sense, as in we're part of an alliance and we work together all the time and they're super like us and we support each other no matter what. And it occurred to me, we need to go back and just get some basic facts on the table, because I think we need to understand what's happening in Europe, what is happening with the United States' role in NATO and in the world. So we're going to just take one topic for today, which is who else has been president of Ukraine before this? Now, for those of you who are Gen Z or millennials or anything younger, you may have completely forgotten from high school ancient history class any lessons on the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, which is what came before all this. Yes, I know the Cold War is so boring and so very Gen X and boomer and old and whatnot, but it's still with us. It's still important, especially since Ukraine has only had its own presidents since the fall of the USSR, of the Soviet Union. So if we're going to have all these fan clubs for Ukrainian presidents, we should probably know a little bit more about their system. We're not even going to do their political parties today, but We've got a few presidents to cover going back to 1991. So before we have any more online pep rallies, let's do the presidents of Ukraine and get all on the same page. Let's go.
Mykola Plaviuk was born on the 5th of June, 1925, in the village of Russo, Poland, now independent Ukraine. During World War II, Mykola became active in the Plast scouting movement, which spotted, assessed, and recruited young Ukrainians to join the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. After World War II, Plaviuk fled to Germany and got a degree in economics from the University of Munich. Plaviuk then emigrated to Montreal, Quebec, Canada in 1949, where he remained active with the Ukrainian diaspora there, eventually becoming Ukraine's president in exile. Russian intelligence and its Ukrainian partners, the MGB, were all over Plaviuk from early days, so confident that they were going to take him down that his official code name was Bezdolny, which translates to doomed or unfortunate. Canada proved an excellent location for a Ukrainian patriot, and the Ukrainian MGB was unable to surveil his work recruiting up Ukrainians in North America to fight Soviet repression. The Russians apparently lost track of him partly because they messed up basic stuff like spelling his Ukrainian name correctly in Russian spy archives. The Russians, however, had no problem finding his father and brother back home and harassed them both over Plaviuk's activities in Canada. By 1965, the KGB assessed that Plaviuk was a convinced nationalist and, quote, a vicious enemy of the USSR. After the declaration of independence of Ukraine on August 24, 1991, just after the fall of the Soviet Union, Plaviuk officially relinquished his title as president in exile and supported the inauguration of Leonid Kravchuk as the country's first sovereign head of state. Mykola Plaviuk took an active part in the development of Ukraine's statehood. In January 1992, he set foot on Ukrainian soil for the first time in 48 years, no longer afraid that a trip home would mean a permanent trip to prison. In May 1993, he was granted Ukrainian citizenship. For services to the motherland, he was awarded the Order of Prince Yaroslav the Wise. Plaviuk passed away on March 10, 2012, and was buried in the city of Oakville, Ontario, Canada, at the Ukrainian Cemetery of St. Volodymyr.
Guys, I wish I could do the rest of the biographies of Ukraine's presidents with as much reverence as can be reserved for Mykola Plaviuk. That was a man who did some of the most dangerous covert actions around the world, daring the KGB to kill him for decades as a patriot of a country that didn't exist yet. I wish I could do all of the presidents of Ukraine with the same respect and honor that you can reserve for Plaviuk, who was the president in exile and who never became head of state. I wish I could, but I really can't. I don't think it would be appropriate. In 1991, Leonid Kravchuk came to power, and yes, he had the support of Plaviuk, but at the end of the day, Kravchuk became part of the Communist Party in 1958. He was a political economics professor in Kyiv under the Communist Party auspices, and he specialized in propaganda and ideology. In 1990, he became head of the Ukraine Supreme Soviet, and then in 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, he became the first sovereign president. But he was a communist. He was part of the problem, not part of the solution. So Plaviuk supported him, but really the country was still run by the same people who had just been making their citizens miserable. Kravchuk was in power until 1994, when he was replaced by his prime minister, Leonid Kuchma. Kuchma was the only president of Ukraine to last 2 terms, but those years were not exactly covered in glory. It was in that period of 1994 to 2005 that the mafia oligarchs really came to prominence. And in 2002, the United States actually sanctioned all of Ukraine for money laundering practices that financed international terrorists. They did this under the Patriot Act, one of 2 countries, the other being Nauru. It was that period when the Russian oligarchs really got their hooks in the place. 2005 saw the rise of Viktor Yushchenko. The official winner of the election at first in 2004 was pro-Putin Viktor Yanukovych. But the election results were overturned in the Orange Revolution, and Yushchenko came to power. Soon thereafter, he had a falling out with his main political ally, Yulia Tymoshenko. She's the woman that political consultant Tad Devine originally came up with the term lock her up for, although it was in Ukrainian first. Yushchenko had a falling out with Tymoshenko, and then in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, the ardent pro-Putin oligarch, came to power for real, this time with the help of future Donald Trump campaign consultant Paul Manafort. Yanukovych was subsequently convicted of treason and has now been sentenced to 13 years in prison in absentia. He has fled to Moscow following the invasion of Donbass and Crimea, which was done with Yanukovych's tacit approval. In 2014, Yanukovych was replaced by chocolate magnate and TV station owner Petro Poroshenko, who has also been charged with treason and sanctioned by his own country since then. In 2019, Volodymyr Zelensky moved over from doing a television program called Servant of the People, ran under the Servant of the People party, and was elected in April of 2019. Then he had a bunch of weird calls with Donald Trump. Donald Trump got impeached over those. And in 2022, Russia cut out all the fancy moves and just invaded the place. And that brings us up to the modern day. And I got to tell you, I'm troubled by a lot of this, because I find myself kind of agreeing with Mikhail Gorbachev's conceit when he said that Russia is as bad as it is because the United States and the West abandoned it, that the US should have given it way more support after the fall of the Soviet Union. And for years, that's stuck in my craw. It's like, we don't have to be, well, what is it? Do you want us to be the world's policeman? Do you want us to support the entire world and have our influence everywhere? Or do you not? Because the Russians were just as quick to attack us for spreading democracy. And all of a sudden, Gorbachev was like, well, you didn't help us enough. And, for the longest time, I've resisted that. But looking back at the last 30 years of Ukraine, I'm not sure Gorbachev was wrong. Because the real question for me is, why wasn't Plaviuk allowed to become president? This is a guy who suffered for years in a country that didn't exist yet and worked ardently to bring them democracy, and he was never allowed. The people actually in charge were communists and then mob bosses or mob puppets. After having basically ignored Ukraine's democracy, which was under constant attack by the Russians had enough material and practice attacking elections in the modern context, including through social media and other digital communications, which they definitely did in many of Ukraine's elections, where they experimented on how Facebook could be used. So we had a warning, especially the intelligence community had a warning of what was going on. And then in 2016, it wasn't just Russia, but Russia, Israel, Saudi, China, Hezbollah, everybody was jumping in to attack America's democracy. So really, if we're a country that believes that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that these are universal declarations of the rights of man, we need to fight for them as hard in Ukraine and stay as a population, not just our geopolitics nerds in DC, but all of us have to stay tuned in to all of these democracies around the world and help them out and support them as much as people are right now with Zelensky. So I guess the main message is democracy is not a spectator sport, kids. We got to get out there and do it every day, be the hardest worker out there. That's it for this episode. What do you think of the Cold War? Did it end? Is it still going on? Do you remember it personally? Were you taught it in school? What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments, or for that matter, anything else you can think of. One last thing, click like, click subscribe so we can keep doing these. And it's always a pleasure to spend time with you like this. Thanks for having me. Talk soon.